to our virtual event on the impact of volunteering. I'm Erica Pandy, senior reporter at Axios, and I'm joining you today from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, X, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on X with @Axios and #Axios events. Over the next 40 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague Crystal Dixon, and we'll dive into the state of play of volunteerism in America and how it can be most impactful. I'm excited to welcome our first guest today. She's a lieutenant governor from the great state of Utah, Deidre Henderson, joining us from Salt Lake City. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. So I want to start with a stunning stat here. According to the latest census and AmeriCorps data, Utah has the highest rate of volunteerism of any state in the union at around 47%. To put that in some context for our viewers, the national rate is somewhere around 28%. And I'm even more stunned by the informal volunteering rate, which is kind of counting, people helping their neighbors and their friends on the side, not kind of an official capacity. That's at 68%. So I guess my first question for you is, does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't. I mean, this is really kind of who we are as Utahns. We help each other. We serve each other. We love to give back to our community, but it is a very intentional thing, and we do risk losing that if we aren't intentional about maintaining that level of service and volunteerism.
What does that look like on the ground in Utah when you have nearly half of your citizens volunteering in a formal capacity and the majority, helping each other out in small and big ways? What is the impact that has?
Well, there's a lot of impacts to service. Certainly, service impacts those who are being served, but truly it also impacts the people giving the service. We have been known as one of the happiest states in the nation as well. And I think that these two things correlate. They tie into each other. Service does make people happier. There's a study that shows that happy people serve more, but also that serving and volunteering causes people to become happier. So it's a nice, you hear about vicious cycles. This is a really good cycle.
And I mean, you mentioned how this kind of is connected to the ethos of the state in many ways, but is there what are the policies coming out of your office, out of the governor's office, that are driving this rate up? Are there any, is there a secret sauce that other states can kind of tap into a little bit?
I don't think the government can take credit for this at all. This is a product, I believe, of religious organizations, not just our predominant religion, but many religious organizations throughout the state of Utah. Utah is a fairly religious state, and that those communities of faith actually help people come together and serve one another in ways that aren't possible if it's just the government requiring it or asking people to do it. So really our faith communities are strong in Utah. As we see those faith communities, though, maybe diminishing or becoming less strong, maybe the younger generation is not as keen on participating in various church activities, then we do need to look at ways that we can fill in those gaps or provide service opportunities and build a culture of service for people who aren't engaged in religious organizations. That, I think, is where government can play a role, and what we're trying to do in with our young people in our high school service initiative.
Yeah, I want to dive deeper on that. That's a perfect segue. Like you say, kind of the rates of volunteering among younger people, even in states where volunteering is high, tend to be a little bit lower than their parents or grandparents. And one way you're looking at, maybe chipping away at that is this high school pilot program. Tell us, the elevator pitch on what it is. Catch our viewers up here.
So, we have the same problem in Utah that many states have, and that is we've got young people who are becoming increasingly disconnected from each other, young people who are experiencing mental health crises, young people who are depressed, who feel like they live in a post-hope world, and that is something that I heard from as a Zoomer influencer, thinking that Zoomers, our Gen Zs, maybe don't see a lot of good or hope in the future, and that's really troubling to me. We've had everybody in our young people are very fixated on their phones, on social media. And ever since we've had smartphones with this access to social media, we have really seen this uptick, a terrible uptick in mental health challenges with our young people. In the state of Utah, we have enacted policies to help remove those phones from schools and help focus and give parents the tools that they need to help their kids not be harmed by social media. But we can't just take things away. We actually have to fill that void with something else. And so we started last year looking at this idea of really implementing service initiatives in our high schools. And now all our high schools have some form of this, and there are always students who participate in service, and they're incredible. But what we're maybe missing is the kids who aren't participating in the service are the ones who probably need to the most. And so what we're trying to do is build a culture of service in our high schools from the ground up. This cannot be, the state government dictating from Capitol Hill. This has to be organic at the bottom and tailored, crafted to the needs of individual schools. We've got 5 school districts or a statewide charter school who are piloting this for us. There's over 30,000 students who will be participating this school year in this service initiative. And what they're doing is building this idea that through their classes, project-based service, with a reflection element to it where they can look back at what they did and learn from it. These school districts will be sharing what they've learned with each other to try to build something that can then be implemented statewide. Students will be earning recognitions as part of their graduation who participated in this. The goal is to get every single high school student in the state of Utah to participate in meaningful service by the time they graduate from high school. What this does is it builds on a foundation for their future. It will make them better leaders in the future. It will make them more civically engaged in the future. It will help keep our state strong. And it will also, there's a lot of links between not just mental health improvements, but physical health improvements for those who actually give and serve.
And I mean, this is a brand new program, as you just said. Do you have, anything you can tell us from what's happening? Are there, examples of types of service students are participating in, or anything you've heard from students on how they feel about it?
Well, so it is very new. 3 of our school districts just started implementing it in the last couple of months. 2 others are going to be starting in January. But from what we'd heard in the lead up to it, there are projects. They'll be connecting with outside organizations. We've got You Serve Utah that's going to be spearheading a lot of the connecting for school districts who need assistance with finding ways for these students to engage. But we really have given a lot of flexibility and leeway to our school districts to figure this out. But we will have these regular touch points throughout the year to make sure that things are going in the right direction. We've provided some funding so that they can hire people who, the warrior in chief, the person whose job it is to implement this in the school districts and in their schools. And so we're going to be learning from each other along the way.
I want to pivot just a little bit and take advantage of the fact that I'm sitting here with one of America's prominent women leaders. The Center for American Women in Politics just released new data that said in this past election cycle, we reached a new record high of the number of women in state legislatures. In the spirit of giving back, what's one way women in leadership, whether that's in politics or in business or somewhere else, can give back to the younger women rising up behind them?
That is a really good question, and it's something I actually think about a lot. Being a woman in these positions isn't always easy. I mean, it's not easy to be a man, I'm sure, in these positions as well. But sometimes it feels extra daunting when you're the only woman in the room or one of the few women in the room. What I try to tell myself and what I advise other women to do is to think about the fact that this isn't about me. This isn't about them. This is about the people who are coming behind us. And we can't solve all the problems. We're not going to break all of the glass ceilings or break down all of the brick walls, but we can tear a few bricks off the wall to make it easier for the women who are coming behind us. So if we think about others when we're doing our jobs, recognize that we have a responsibility to do our little bit of good while we can, that's got to be good enough for us.
Tearing a few bricks. I love that. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for joining Axios.
Thank you.
Our next guest is the President and CEO of United Way Worldwide, Angela F. Williams, joining us today from Alexandria, Virginia. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So, Angela, I want to start a little bit by talking about your own story, which is really a remarkable one. You've made history as the first woman and first Black president of United Way Worldwide, and your wealth of experience covers everything from leading nonprofits to serving in the military. So can you tell us a little bit about what some of the biggest things you take away from your life experience that feeds your perspective on volunteerism and giving?
Thank you. It starts from the family that I actually grew up in. My dad was a Baptist pastor and then later joined the Navy as a chaplain. So I grew up in a household with an ethic of service, always caring for our neighbors, making sure to use our time, our talent, and our treasure to make our community better. So no matter whether I served in the military or whether it was as a Department of Justice lawyer or whether it was working in government or in a corporation, I always had this ethic of service, volunteerism, and making sure that in whatever community I served or lived in, that I made a difference.
And there are still some really amazing examples of service all over the country happening this week for Giving Tuesday all year long. But we do see that charitable donations have been dropping, adjusting for inflation. And the latest stat is that the national rate of volunteering is around 28%, which is, up from the pandemic lows, but still lower than it's historically been. What's your perspective on why the culture of giving looks like it's at least fading a little bit?
I know what the data says about the volunteerism numbers going down. However, I would just say what I've seen in recent events is that people are willing to step in at a moment's notice. Most recently, we've seen several states experience devastating hurricanes. And we have also seen people from states far away go to those communities to help people with the food lines or getting things up and running again or removing trees, you name it, whatever the community is needed. So I still feel like there's a sense of compassion in people where when they know about something happening that's critical, that's a crisis, they're willing to do what it takes, their small part or their big part, to make a difference.
And you're at the helm of a 137-year-old organization. So you've got the long view on, how giving has changed and also a perspective on what we're looking to in the future. One of your priorities is galvanizing the leaders of the future. How do you go about doing that? How do you kind of inspire the young people, the next generation?
We started just about a year ago a program called our Next Generation Leaders Initiative, where we are really tapping into the young people that are affiliated with United Way to give them new ways of thinking about leading in the nonprofit sector and what it means in terms of shaping the future of the sector to ensure that our communities are resilient.
And what does, I think one of the things that can be inspiring to understand and not a lot of people think about is that giving looks a lot like a lot of different ways, right? There's the formal volunteering hours you could put in at your charity, there's donating money to a nonprofit, but there's also a lot of other stuff. What are some of the most interesting, different definitions of giving in your book?
Well, when you think about the younger generations that have access to technology, we see how they're putting together giving pools, or we see how they are using Cash App or other social media tools in which to give, or they're working with their friends in a concerted effort on a particular passion project. And so that's what keeps me going and keeps me hopeful about people caring for each other, caring for their communities. What we're also seeing, going back to my comment about passion projects, people care about their environment. So it could be something as simple as cleaning up their environment or organizing groups to clean up a beach or a park. We also see people deciding that they want to plant trees to make their spaces more welcoming and livable. So, how people show up when it comes to volunteerism is not only just the time that they're willing to commit or the amount of money that they're willing to give, and it's also serving on boards of local nonprofits or also sharing their personal experience if they're a professional like a lawyer or have expertise in IT or social media. They could go to a small nonprofit and say, we know you can't employ that talent, but I'm here to help you. Let me put your website up. Let me set up your Instagram account or your Facebook account. So there's just a myriad of ways in which people can give back.
And a lot of the ways you just mentioned kind of fall into that informal giving category, which tends to stay high among Americans, even when formal giving might look like it's falling. There are, though, still a lot of areas where there is need for sort of a formal kind of, putting in volunteer hours, giving money. Where are those pockets of need that you see that, the places that kind of keep you up at night?
Well, let me share with you that United Way is part of what's called the 211 Health and Human Services hotline that we run across the United States and then also Canada. We take in approximately 50,000 calls a day from individuals that are in need. And the primary requests are people not being able to access enough food, or are in need of shelter or paying rent or utilities. When you think about people being food insecure, there are so many different ways that people can volunteer to go to a warehouse to pack meals. We see that especially during holidays where people would love to receive the blessing of a care package of food so that they can feed their families and enjoy the holidays like so many others. I would encourage people to do a couple of things. Contact their local United Way to identify the ways that they can volunteer. Think about not only just the manual labor of, for example, working to distribute food. It is, again, serving on a nonprofit board of directors. Or, as I said before, if you have a specific skill set, calling a nonprofit and just saying, hey, let me tell you what I can offer, and would you be willing to accept my time to donate to you?
And you mentioned the holidays. I mean, I think that's such a lot of people thinking about giving during the holidays. We ask readers their plans. A lot of them say, the day before Thanksgiving, I go with my kids to a food bank, or instead of Christmas, instead of giving each other gifts, we get gifts for those less fortunate than us. And that's really, really incredible. I do wonder, though, if you see a dip in volunteerism and giving kind of on the other months and it rises in the holidays. And if you do see that dip, how do you kind of make sure this spirit of giving isn't a seasonal thing?
That's a great question because with the television and with ads around holidays, that just brings the opportunity to give to the forefront. But it is absolutely important that we think about 365 days out of the year. There are communities in need, there are individuals in need, and there is an opportunity for giving. And so, what I would just commend people to do is to always just look around their communities, look around in their circles of friends and family, and be mindful that there are people in need of monetary gifts or tangible gifts. Or there are people that may be even suffering from mental health crises, and there's a need for them to receive support and services. So if we know, we can also look at the climate and just our environments. So if we can constantly just remind each other that, hey, take time out of your day to think about somebody else and what you can contribute, then that's the best legacy that you can live and leave behind as a human being that cares about others.
We have just about 30 seconds left, so I'll ask you rapid fire. Looking at the next decade of giving back in the US, what is one thing that gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that we have multiple generations, and I always know that the human spirit is compassionate, and when there is a need, there will be people that come to the rescue.
And we've seen so many examples of that. Thank you so much for joining Axios.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you.
And now over to Chris Freitz for the next segment.
Thanks, Erica, and thank you to our sponsor, AmeriCorps, for making this conversation possible. And joining me now from AmeriCorps is CEO Michael D. Smith. Michael, thank you so much for joining Axios.
Chris, thank you for having me.
So, Michael, we've seen a real rebound of volunteering post-pandemic. I wonder, what's that? Why?
Well, look, every 2 years we put out this Volunteering and Civic Life in America study that follows how many Americans are volunteering formally with nonprofits, how many are doing the informal neighbor helping neighbor work. And during the pandemic, we saw the biggest drop since we've ever been collecting this information in the number of Americans that say they volunteer informally. And we have to take ourselves back to that moment where people lost their jobs, their livelihoods. Too many of our friends and family members lost their lives. And also the ways that people were engaging to volunteer through their schools, through their community centers. People were being told, you can't come, you can't do it. And so we were worried, would this be a blip or would this be a lasting trend where people were not engaging as much? But I am so happy to report in this new Volunteering and Civic and Life in America study that volunteering is rebounding. We actually have seen a 5% increase in the number of Americans that are volunteering formally with nonprofits. That's 75 million Americans. That's 28.3% of the population. We're also seeing a steady growth in the number of Americans that are doing that informal neighbor helping neighbor work, going to the grocery store for your elderly neighbor, helping to look after somebody else's kids, putting together a community group so kids can learn together. And that's now more than 52% of the nation that's doing that informal helping neighbor work. And all of this is so important because our communities desperately need volunteers to meet all of the challenges that our communities are facing.
And when you look at that rebound, I wonder, what role is technology playing in volunteer engagement?
What I love is that our movement, our agency, our field is not stale or status quo. We survive because we move ahead with the times. I think 20 years ago, when I was first getting involved in this work, if you wanted to volunteer, you made your way downtown to some office building. Maybe you got there via MapQuest. You then went up to the 10th floor and you met a nice lady who opened a big book and said, all right, we'll send you to this Boys and Girls Club. And she handed you a slip of paper and you delivered that. Well, now we have online systems that can connect you just like a dating profile or something. But one of the things that came out of the pandemic was an increase in virtual volunteering. So our VCLA study shows that while 80% of Americans who volunteer formally are doing so in real life in person, 1 in 5 formal volunteers actually engage in activities either through virtual or hybrid volunteering, which is great because if you have marketing skills, if you can do fundraising, if you can translate documents, you could be living in Maine and doing that for someone in Mississippi. And that is wonderful. The other reason it's wonderful is because we've seen the folks that are volunteering virtually or hybrid tend to be a little older and tend to be people with disabilities. So it's an equity, a beautiful equity opportunity, and making sure that we are staying open, we are staying accessible, and we're staying ahead of the times.
And what has been the impact of volunteering on underserved communities?
This is so important. One, I think it's important to note that volunteering is not just a nice thing, it is a critical thing. Our communities simply do not have enough money to pay all of the people to do all of the things that our communities need to keep our society whole and well. And so that's where volunteers enter in. And this most recent study showed that not only did we have 499 billion hours served, that led to $167 billion in economic value. And so when you're talking about communities that are hard hit, communities that are dealing with tough times, that are underserved, that money matters. That money matters because people are showing up to work in a school that might not have enough teachers, tutors, mentors, or coaches. And they're showing up in our community health clinics that might not have enough public health workers. They're showing up in our food banks where people might not be able to manage the lines of people that need food distribution. And so that is wonderful. But we also see that folks that volunteer have a 27% higher likelihood of finding a job after being unemployed than non-volunteers. So service takes you on a path from service to career pathways. And as much as you're giving back, you are getting so much out of it as well. And that matters for our communities that are dealing with inequities and that are finding themselves in under-resourced spaces.
And Michael, one of the things we've heard a lot about post-pandemic is loneliness. And I wonder, how does volunteering combat social isolation?
Gandhi once said, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in service. The Surgeon General has diagnosed America with a loneliness epidemic. And what we found about service is that when you serve, it improves physical health, it improves mental health, it decreases social isolation, and it increases social cohesion. So there is this wonderful triple bottom line to service. One, for the community that's being served. Two, for the person that's serving. And then three, to a society that is more civically involved, that is healthier, and even more united. Actually, we find with our AmeriCorps members, 93% of them said that they are more comfortable working with people from different backgrounds after their service. And more than 70% actually said that they changed a deeply held belief after they served. And when we live in these echo chambers and we're more divided and polarized, I am so excited that service can be a space where we can roll up our sleeves and we can see each other's humanity.
I want to go back to something that you had said earlier, Michael, about the survey finding that more Americans are helping their neighbors just informally. I wonder, what does that tell us about volunteering? And what does that tell us about civic life in America?
Well, that tells us when the going gets tough, Americans get tougher. I have an opportunity to travel all over this country, and I see America at its very best. I was just in Florida, where we had AmeriCorps members from California and from Colorado who were helping to muck and gut houses after a hurricane. I've been to places where people are coming from all over the country to mitigate fires, to battle coastal erosion. I've been to places where people are moving to tutor and mentor children, where there just aren't enough staff resources. And so this idea that Americans don't want to turn inward, they want to turn outward is extraordinary. And the numbers back it up. Not only do we have the formal volunteering, but we have more than 137.5 million people that help their neighbors informally, or 52% of the population. And we're seeing people at all ages and all stages jumping in. What I will say, and when folks dig into the data, women are volunteering more than men, which is probably should be no surprise. Baby boomers had the highest informal helping rate. And people with children under 18 actually volunteered more than people that had older children or no children at all.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. Michael D. Smith is the CEO of AmeriCorps. Michael, thank you so much for joining Axios.
Chris, thank you for having me, and I hope people will join this great volunteer movement. If you go to AmeriCorps.gov, we can find a way to put you to work. If you're 18 to 80, anywhere in between or beyond, we've got something for you to do.
All right. Now, over to Crystal Dixon.
Thanks, Chris. Our final guest today is the CEO of the Carter Center, Paige Alexander. Hi, Paige. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Crystal. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Well, so can you talk about how does the Carter Center engage with service?
Sure. Well, I think civic engagement, including service and volunteerism, is really a core tenet of democracy and of the Carter Center programs over the last 40 years, whether it's been the work that we do in Guinea Worm, overseas, where we work with thousands of community volunteers to help them work within their community to rid their area of this parasitic disease, or whether it's working with democracy resilience networks here in the US. This is a core tenet of what we think democracy is.
Can you talk about how you all are encouraging people to have conversations about the importance of democracy as well as service amid the incoming changes in government that we're going to see?
Sure. Well, I think this generation and all of us really are in our own echo chambers, whether it's social media or whether it's what we read or what we watch on TV. It's really the political landscape has just become almost farcical because you only hear what the algorithms tell you to hear. And so at the Carter Center, we had decided in 2020, when we began working in the US, that we really wanted to work directly at the community level. You know, they say all politics is local, but all development is local. And so it's important for us that we are listening to the communities, whether it's on a global health issue in Mali or Sudan, or whether it's in Arizona or Florida. We want to make sure that we are hearing from both right and left-leaning leads. And so we set up something called the Democracy Resilience Networks in 7 different states. And these bipartisan teams, actually in 6 states, did a lot to earn media before the election. And they were able to demonstrate that there are people on the right and the left who still share broad civic values, and they trust elections and believe in peaceful political engagement. And I think those are the type of people that we need to continue having conversations with at the community level.
And how many people are involved in those networks across the country?
Well, again, we're in 6 different states. And so every state has a different number of folks involved. In Wisconsin, in Michigan, they have Michiganders for Resilience. They're all named locally. North Carolina for Free and Trusted Elections. You know, when they do these, you know, it's hundreds, it's thousands. When they do these conversations like town halls in different counties, they answer basic questions. And when you have someone from the right and someone from the left sitting on stage together and having a conversation, people in the audience can be the same way, and they can ask very probing questions and hear answers from, quote, the other side. And I think it does a lot to build faith and trust in the communities.
Can you talk about how you all are reaching people who may not be tuned into these conversations, you know, about service and democracy? Because, you know, a lot of people are in their own silos when it comes to social media. So how are you all reaching people who are not who are not following this topic?
Well, you know, not everyone lurches from breaking news alert to breaking news alert. What they care about is whether they can get their kids to school without being stopped, whether they can, you know, all of the things that are local to every community, whether they can pay their rent, whether they can put food on the table. And so we have seen, and again, in this concept that development is very local, we do a lot of this work overseas with a Peace Health Nexus. For example, we talk to warlords and political leaders who are fighting about a major issue, but their community is suffering from an endemic disease like guinea worm or a blinding eye disease. And when we come in and say, let's talk about the nexus of, let's put these issues aside so we can get in to do these health programs to make sure our kids aren't dying and people aren't going blind, you find that once you find a critical issue that everyone can agree on, the fighting stops. And so we saw this, there was a guinea worm ceasefire in Sudan where it was negotiated that we could get packages in for medical provisions. And then the warlords realized there was really no reason to continue the fight, that they could agree on this type of work. And so we build on that. And so that's how we reach people who aren't tuned in to these issues. They recognize always that there's something bigger than what they were fighting over. And so the question now here in the US is, where can we find that nexus for people to get off their own soapbox and start having a dialogue? You know, we've had a lot of success. The Carter Center's had a lot of success through these civic networks that we're supporting and convening Americans from across the political spectrum to be advocates for democratic values. We also we have a Faith Forward network. It is helpful when you can have multi-faith engagement within the communities, and you can talk about these things the community level, from the pulpit, from the mosque. You can have all of these conversations that are important to the community. And so I think the call to action, in my belief, to reach people who may not be turned into this, the call to action really comes down to civil society and communities need to rise. These are local issues. They're not all national. And so how do we make this a local democracy provision in terms of building up that civil society and building up what people need in their own homes every day?
So what is your outlook on engaging in democracy and service in the near future?
I think many people, I would say on the left, are probably fried from what they did before. On the right, they've worked really hard to put their guy in. And there's this belief that we're just fighting against each other. But at the end of the day, everybody wants their family to be as successful as they can be. And so the call to action from my belief is that people have got to find a civil way to have conversations with each other. The election's over. We know who's in charge. We know how this is going to happen. And now we have to see what the rollout is. How can we as citizens participate? I mean, President Carter used to always say his absolute favorite part of any job he's ever had was being a U.S. citizen. And so for him, this was the active participation that a single man from a village in South Georgia of 600 people, he was able to take these thoughts forward to an elected office, and then to the work that he and Mrs. Carter started here at the Carter Center. So I think as we look across what we are each capable and competent of doing on our own, I think we have to find what gives us passion and where we think we can be helpful. And so that's where I think we're going to have to look in over the next 4, 8, 12 years. It's not all about lurching from election to election. It's about what's important to you, what's important to your community, and how can you help?
Is there anything else that I or my audience or our audience should know about this topic?
Well, I think that there's something, the Policy Circle is an organization. They say it really well. They say when citizens are engaged, they can exchange ideas, invest in finding solutions, and employ civilized discourse to address the issues in their community. And so I think that level of empowerment is exactly what is needed, whether it's a church or a synagogue or a local school or a nonprofit. Research has always shown that working together for the common good increases our trust in one another. And so that's an area that I think we all should be charged with working on. It's people are fried, people are tired, people have accomplished what they wanted to accomplish or worried about the future, but there will be a future and we all need to participate in that equally. And so that's the charge I would put forward.
Paige Alexander, the CEO of the Carter Center, thank you so much for your time.
It's great to talk to you, and thanks for everything everyone's going to do over the next several years to make their communities stronger.
Thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more information or to sign up for Axios newsletters, visit axios.com/newsletters. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.